Welcome to Dog Training Bytes, the show where canine professionals share their key takeaways, big aha moments, and hardest lessons learned from working with dogs. I'm Mattison, certified dog trainer and behavior consultant, and dogs are my life. Every day, I get to coach guardians and other trainers into a deeper understanding of canine behavior. But let's face it, sometimes dog training really bites. And that's okay, because when it does, we learn a lot. This podcast is all about sharing the lessons learned from experience, because the stories of when it got tough or when we made a mistake, that's when we learn the lessons worth learning. And it's time we share those with the world. I'll be talking to dog trainers and other pet professionals about times that working with dogs, well, bit. Not literally. Maybe literally. What's most important here on this show, what did they walk away with? What did they learn? How did it shape their approach today? Welcome to Dog Training Bytes, the show where pet professionals share personal lessons that you won't find in any textbook. I am very excited today to introduce a good friend of mine, Em Breslin. Em is a retired vet tech, pet sitter, and dog walker with 30 years of hands-on experience working with animals. Her audio project, Straight Up Dog Talk, debuted in January of this year. This podcast is working to normalize tough conversations around a variety of canine topics through the lens of someone who has been behind the treatment room doors. Em has just made the decision to begin a new career in dog training and plans to complete her education and certification programs this year. Hey, Em, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am stoked. I think this is such a cool opportunity because you are literally less than a week away from beginning your first apprenticeship, your first sort of final jump into the training world, which I know is something that you've really, truly, deeply considered for a long time, years.
A really long time. It was actually the thing that I considered before becoming a vet tech, and then while I was a vet tech, which you guys will get to learn about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I actually want to start with a question that I already know the answer to, but I want to really hear about your dogs and have you tell the listeners about Toby and Fitz.
So my current two dogs are Toby and Fitz. Toby is a 12-pound Chihuahua mix that was originally used as a bait dog, and I rescued him from a shelter. He was pretty much feral and just kind of awful and mean, and he bit everyone in my family and all of my friends. And now he is just like this little potato love bug. He's completely reformed, has less teeth, he has no bite, and he's just special little guy. And then Fitz is a dog that was given to me by my neighbor because they had an accidental litter of puppies due to the fact that they rescued his mom off of the side of the road. And she said, "You can have the pick of the litter. My sister will take the other dog." There was only two because his mom's only about 20 pounds
Mm.
and his dad's about 35 pounds. And Fitz is 50 pounds.
Yeah,
He's
that's some
bigger than
math right
both his
there.
parents. Yes. Well, that's what happens when you breed dogs backwards. The mother is supposed to be bigger than the father. And in this case, the father was much bigger than the mother. So that's what happens. You get smaller litters and bigger puppies.
Yeah.
And he is a border collie American Eskimo with lots of other thing kind of mix, surprisingly Shar-Pei. You'd never see it in his face if you actually take a look at his smiley happy face on Instagram. And he's my busybody. He's very busy. He's a ball obsessed and he keeps me on my toes all the time. Whereas Toby is just like, let me sit in your lap and let's hang out.
Toby's the fighter turned potato.
He is the fighter turned potato. It's such a rewarding thing to see your dog go from this completely fear-based, overreactive, mean, just lashing out dog into this complete cuddle buddy that doesn't care who it is that walks through the door and is immediately like, love me, pet me, say hello to me. So
Yeah.
it's been a really cool journey with him. We've been together 10 years and Fitz
Wow.
will be 6 in January.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. Well, I am really excited to hear your story today. And you did send me some notes ahead of time, which I will be honest, I glanced at. I didn't read them because I wanted to hear this story. This is a story that you've referenced to me and mentioned to me. And so, I really just thank you for bringing this to me and to the listeners to be able to hear. And yeah, so why don't you tell me the story that you've brought for us today?
So this is a story about my three original dogs. This is kind of a rough story, so if I get emotional, I apologize. Even though it's been over 10 years since all of this happened, it was very traumatic. And I think that it's really important to share this kind of stuff because people do go through this and they don't talk about it because they don't know how to deal with it or how to process it. And it took me a long time to get over it. So initially, I started with Cajun and I got him in June of 2005 and in Orlando, Florida. And then I moved to Texas. And my fiance at the time decided that he needed a friend and we needed to have another dog, even though we already had one dog and two cats and two kids. He had two daughters. And so that's when we brought in Izzy in August of 2006. I should have known because her birthday was June 6th of 2006 that this
Oh
was going to
no.
be a problem.
Yeah.
But it was
Not a
just one of
good
those
omen.
things we kind of just joked about. And Izzy and Cajun were fine with each other. They were great. She respected the fact that, he was there first. He was the older dog, not that much older, but they got along just fine. And then I began working in the veterinary clinics, and we had someone bring in a puppy that was probably 5 weeks old, definitely too young to be away from the mother. They'd found her in a trash can, and they said, we're not going to keep this dog. The pound won't take her. We're turning her over to you guys. This is like, the suburbs right outside of Dallas, Texas, not a good area. And, people didn't have a lot, money, didn't want to pay for her. And I was like, well, you really should try, take her back to the shelter or, put her in the paper, try to rehome her, try to find the owner. And he said, if I have to take this dog with me, I'm going to shoot it. And I said, no, you're
Right.
not.
Right.
So I had him sign the surrender papers
Yeah.
and I didn't even ask. I just brought her home. And he ended up being, I believe, I wish there had been DNA tests back then. This was approximately January of 2007. And she ended up being what I would assume is a lab German Shepherd Mastiff mix. She was huge. She was 120 pounds.
Oh, big
And
girl.
she was a big girl, and her name was Fiona. And ever since I brought her in, Izzy was like, no, nope, this is not happening. Screw this. I don't like it. She was mean to her. She picked on her. And
Mm.
it became a thing where it just progressively got worse and worse and worse and worse. And, of course, at this point in time, it was okay. I was at work during the day. My ex-husband was at work during the day. They were in their kennels and everything was fine. But it got to the point where Izzy was getting more and more aggressive. She was attacking Fiona
Mm.
and not in the way that was like, this is play, like obvious play, like bowing and like,
Yeah.
tail wagging. This was tail down, head down, teeth
Yeah. The
bared,
emotions were not
growling.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, lunging. The body language it was very obvious. So initially what we did is we created a system where, Cajun and Cajun and Fiona would stay inside and Izzy would go outside by herself and then we would swap. So each of the dogs were getting attention and they were, interacting with, we would let Cajun interact with Izzy too, but towards the end there, it started even getting to the point where I didn't trust her being around Cajun.
Mm.
Well, about, we've been dealing this about 2 years. And in December of 2009, I had a brain and spinal surgery where they removed part of my spinal cord, the rungs on C1 and C2 in my neck and the back of my skull. And so I was, a little bit, it wasn't as easy for me to do the things that I had been doing to keep them separate.
Yeah.
And I had brought in a specialty trainer. His name was Ron. He unfortunately passed in 2019. And Ron was a really great asset to me. He came over and he really, really helped me a lot. Now, Ron was a trainer for the Dallas police. He recommended a couple of other trainers. I went through them. It always came back to Ron. And so Ron came over and we started teaching her tasks. We gave her jobs. And I would spend, 1 to 3 hours a day in the yard with her, having her run through these routines, doing these tasks, giving her things to do so that she would be worn out and not as confrontational. But we were still putting Izzy and in her kennel and then, letting Cajun and Fiona out, and then we would swap them so that there was never any crossover because it was
How long were you
dangerous.
doing that crate and rotate?
A year and a half.
Wow. Okay.
It
Wow.
got to the point where it was too much. And then 3 months after I had my brain surgery is when everything went terribly, terribly, terribly wrong.
Mm.
And I know it was March 2010. I was legitimately 3 months out from having this massive surgery. And my ex-husband was traveling out of town, and I was home with his daughters. And there was a miscommunication. And oldest stepdaughter let Izzy into the house before I had Fiona and Crate. And she opened the bedroom door, and Izzy lunged immediately for
Mm.
Fiona's throat. And she grabbed onto her throat, and there was blood like spraying everywhere. It was like a horror movie. There was
Yeah.
blood everywhere. I cleaned up blood for
God,
days after that.
can't imagine.
And to finally like break them apart, I actually had to slam Izzy's muzzle in the door to get her to let go because Fiona was too far away. I couldn't get Izzy up. I couldn't lift more than 10 pounds. So I couldn't do the
Right.
wheelbarrow to try to do that. I didn't have a leash. I couldn't choke. I had nothing. So I repeatedly, probably 3 or 4 times, slammed her muzzle in the door until she let go. Immediately put her in her kennel, put Cajun in his kennel, put Fiona in the car, and I called the veterinarian that I had recently worked for. This is at like 10 o'clock at night. And she met me at the clinic, immediately started doing surgery on Fiona. And then I went and got Izzy, and I brought Izzy to the clinic. And on the way to the clinic, I had called Ron and I said, this is what happened. I think it's time. I think I have to put her down. I don't think I have a choice. And if it had not been for that man, here's where I get emotional. He said to me, Emily, you have done this longer and you have put more time and effort and training and energy into this dog than anybody else on the planet would have. He said, you gave her so many chances. And now that she's, dug into her throat, like she wasn't going for any other part of the body. She went right for
Yeah.
her throat and she could have killed her. You have to let her go. There's definitely some undiagnosed idiopathic aggression here. Something is not right with her neurologically. And we can't fix this. We can't train this out of her, no matter how hard we work her, no matter how many times we make sure there isn't this mistake happening again. It's going to happen again. And if it's not one of your dogs, it's going to be somebody else's dogs when you're
Yeah.
walking her or if she escapes the yard. And so I took her in, and the doctor told me, hey, it's probably going to be a couple more hours before we can put her down. Do you want to like spend time with her and all that? And I said, no, I can't even look at her right now. Like I'm so upset because I've put so much time and effort and energy and love into her, and I felt so betrayed because I had worked so hard with her. And from the very beginning when we got Izzy, she was supposed to be my ex-husband's dog, and he was like very adamant about the fact that he would feed her, he would train her, he would do all these things with her, but he traveled for work. So when he
Mm.
was gone, she wouldn't listen to me until I really started working with her, trying to correct the negative behaviors that she was displaying. And so I had her put down, and I just remember how mad he was at me because I didn't let him make that decision. And I mean, I understand, but I had also just had brain surgery, and I could have been in danger. His two daughters could have been in danger. What if she had actually killed Fiona and then moved on to me or one of the kids? Like it wasn't safe for anybody. So I put her down, and I, Fiona recovered, and I learned a completely different lesson from that situation because about, oh gosh, 2 years later, I ended up going through a divorce, and I moved from Texas back to Iowa. And I was living with my parents for about a month because the house that I was renting was not ready for me. And I had told my mom, Fiona has this like fear-based trauma reaction now for obvious reasons. So
Yeah.
even though you have these little dogs, you have these little dogs that are loud and they bark and they lunge and they're dachshunds. Let's just be honest about what breed they because dachshunds think they own the world, right? So they're very bossy, they're very stubborn. And my mom said, it'll be fine, they'll be fine. And she opened the door and she let the dog out. And her 20-pound wired haired dachshund Spike decided to go right for Fiona, lunged at her, barked at her, charged at her. And you can imagine with a 120-pound dog versus a 20-pound dog, she grabbed him, she shook him, and did the wheelbarrow, like got her to drop him. And immediately my parents took him to the emergency vet. And the next day, both dogs were put down. That fear-based trauma is from something that dramatic. I think that, in a situation where it's like the dog has some fear from the kennel or some abuse or something like that, but being attacked by another dog and almost dying, I'm not sure recover.
Well, I think it depends on a lot of variables from that dog's individual resiliency on the front end to the degree to which the damage is really done. And it sounds like Fiona was already not super confident, not super resilient dog, and that was a really traumatic, life-threatening injury. And yeah, I think that when you look at the amount of management that would need to be in place for her for the rest of her life, there is a moment where it's worth having a conversation about quality of life. Now, I have seen dogs come back from experiencing and witnessing some pretty horrific things, but I hear you on needing to evaluate and have these conversations and especially looking at risk, right? Like I think that there's a big lesson here on just risk assessment and evaluating how risky even just a living situation could be based on the dogs that are in that environment and the people, right? All the different factors. So I know this is a lot to kind of digest and dig into here, but I'm curious, what is one of the big lessons from this that you feel impacts the way that you approach being a guardian of dogs, right? Like you have dogs in your life again. You have two dogs again. So how did that impact the decisions that you've made this time around?
Well, the first and foremost things that personally, after that, all of that traumatic, I will never have German personally. It's just they're working dogs. I don't have the ability or the time to invest the amount of training and work that needs to go into a breed like that because I would want them to they had a job, and it's because a lot of them do feel like they to have the job, and also they are more prone to that idiopathic aggression that just in general is. So that is another thing that this is again a personal choice. I will never have a female dog again
Interesting.
because I again like my ex-husband, this is my dog, he is my dog, she will listen to me and only me and all this kind of stuff. So I think that kind of altered my opinion and my relationship with her from the start with Izzy. Now Fiona, she was just like Fitz in the fact that she was a mama's. She loved me. I loved her. We had such a great connection. But I don't know that I will have that kind of male dog again. It was so traumatizing. I think that every time I think about getting a female dog, I remember that and then here I am. I started with Cajun and I ended with Cajun was the only one that made it out of that whole situation. And I just have found that in my personal experience that male dogs tend to bond better with me. Again, I have two male dogs now and never had any of those issues. But I completely agree with you. I think that when you start to notice those kind of behaviors, you have to reevaluate. And, I kind of did that to an extent with Ron and the other trainers. But I think ideally, and this is what I wanted to do, was to find Izzy a home where she would have been the only dog and there weren't, children or cats or anything like that. And that would have and where she wouldn't have interacted socially, she wouldn't have gone out in public, but she would have had a life where she felt comfortable and not threatened and not felt the need to be aggressive towards another dog.
Yeah.
But my ex-husband was vehemently against that. And, I think that would have probably been her only option. So I would definitely say that, if you start to notice that kind of aggression in your dogs, there are now, there's behavior specialists, there are veterinary behavior specialists, there are just training behavior specialists that can really help you assess whether your environment is going to be productive or safe for the rest of your pets. And I think even though it's a hard decision, those are the things that you have to do in order to keep not only yourself safe, but everyone else in your household safe. Just being able to recognize those signs. And there are tests and there are x-rays and there are clinical diagnosis that can be done, blood work, x-rays, all the things now that kind of can identify those things. But neurologically, those things, you can't fix them. And I think you just have to know where that line is and when to draw it and not be afraid to say, okay, enough is enough. The kindest thing for everybody is just to let the dog go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing the story and all of those takeaways. I know that isn't necessarily an easy thing to dig into in that way, so I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you'd like the listeners to know about you or what you do? I know some things are changing and coming down the pipeline for your business, but
Yeah.
and that's going to be, stay tuned there. But is there anything else that you'd like to sort of just share with them right now?
So 2024 is a big year. It's a big year with the podcast releasing at the beginning of the year and me also helping you manage your other podcast, Unpacked,
Yeah.
and really getting to know you and Jerry. And then, entering the dog training world. It's like kind of like coming home again. I had to give up working with animals because of the massive surgery that I had. And all of this stuff has just been a way for me to transmute my passion for animals and return to it in a different way. And I get to educate owners and provide resources to owners and help people be better dog parents. And, I just love that Straight Up Dog Talk is out there and that people can find relatable stories and hopefully resources that help them to achieve whatever it is that they're trying to problem solve with their pets. Because we've talked about this before, like gatekeeping and shaming and, perfection as we see it on Instagram has really changed how people look at dog guardianship. And I think that by opening the door and showing people all the time and effort and work and pain and trauma and, even just the really dark, bad stuff, like kind of this story, is really important because people can feel less alone and they can feel like there really is a true community out there for them. So I just really, really appreciate you giving me the room to speak on this and for having me here today.
I love it. What a powerful message of community to share. That just warms my heart. Well, you can connect with Em on Instagram at MEM_loves dogs. That's M loves dogs. And check the show notes for information on her podcast, Straight Up Dog Talk. Thank you for joining us in the world of Dog Training Bytes, where every challenge brings a lesson worth sinking our teeth into. See you next time. Dog Training Bytes was created, produced, and edited by Mattison Skoog-Simpson. You can connect with me on Instagram at Dog Training Bytes. That's BYTES and at Freed by Training. For information on today's guest and resources for help with your dog or dog training education, visit www.dogtrainingbytes.stream. Looking for more? Listen to my other show, Unpacked, a clinical dog training podcast co-hosted by Sailor Jerry the Dog Trainer and produced by Straight Up Dog Talk, LLC.